My in-laws forced me to sign a prenup before marrying their daughter, but now that I'm worth 5 times more than them, they want to annul it, even going so far as to make a false complaint against me. 8 years ago, my wife and I got married, but before that, my in-laws decided I had to sign a prenuptial agreement, which I found a bit insulting at the time because they had already made it clear they didn't truly welcome me into their family. So, having to sign the prenup felt like an even harder blow. At the time, I was working in sales when I met my wife, but after being with her for a year, I decided to quit my job and start my own electronics brand. We were both 27 years old at the time, and when I finally officially launched my business, I was nearly 28. My wife supported me throughout the entire process and was the happiest when I finally started working on my dream business. However, her parents weren't as thrilled because they thought I was living off her money, which was true to some extent. She was definitely supporting me since I didn't have a stable income, but it's not like I completely depended on her. Anyway, at 29, I decided to propose, and we got married within a year. But a couple of months before the wedding, her parents approached me and told me I needed to sign a prenuptial agreement stating that in the event of a divorce, all of our assets and finances would remain separate, and I wouldn't be able to claim anything that was hers and vice versa. In the event of a divorce, I would also have to reimburse my wife and in-laws for supporting me while I was working on my business, since they occasionally sent money to my wife to help us while we lived together. It felt like a reminder that I was indebted to them, which I thought was unnecessary at the time. I'm fairly certain they included a clause stating that even my wife couldn't claim anything that belonged to me, so everything would be fair. The agreement even stipulated that if we decided to have a joint account, the money in that account would also be divided based on who contributed more, because my in-laws simply assumed that throughout our marriage, my wife would be supporting me. When they approached me with the prenup, they said signing it would be the only way they would feel secure accepting me as their son-in-law. It was quite insulting for several reasons. First, because they assumed I would always depend on my wife and never manage to accomplish anything on my own, which was an unfair assumption in itself since I was already working quite hard at the time to get my business off the ground and avoid being a burden to my wife or anyone. Secondly, even before I quit my job to start my business, I had never inconvenienced them. They had a problem with me from the very beginning, ever since my wife first brought me to their house to introduce me to her parents, because they didn't think I was good enough to date their daughter. And by good enough, I mean rich. For context, my in-laws own a real estate company and have done quite well since they started. They come from wealthy families, so they all grew up comfortably. My parents, on the other hand, had regular jobs. My dad was a high school football coach, and my mom was the manager of a nearby cafe. So I didn't struggle financially growing up, but we certainly didn't have the kind of money my in-laws did. From the start, they used to look down on me. It was the typical sarcastic comments, cruel jokes disguised as humor, and an overall unbearable attitude. I never said a word about it, even though my wife would get really upset with their behavior because I didn't want them to know they had managed to bother me. I thought the best way to deal with them was to ignore them because I knew my wife loved me and I loved her, and that was enough for both of us. I didn't need their approval. So even when they approached me with the prenup, I felt a bit insulted, but I signed it. When they presented it to my wife, she was quite offended, but we had already discussed it beforehand, and she signed it without complaint. We both knew exactly what they were trying to achieve. They just wanted to mess with me and insult me right before the wedding, hoping that maybe I would back out or something, and they could accomplish what they had intended from the start, pushing me aside and somehow getting their daughter to be with someone more appropriate by their standards. Unfortunately for them, they haven't succeeded so far, and they never will because my wife and I will always be on the same team. That was several years ago. Since then, I've made significant progress in my career. My business grew, and I continued working on it. In the last 2 years, it experienced exponential growth and started performing better than ever. Suddenly, I guess the social media marketing and all the hard work I had put into my company finally paid off. Whatever it was, it worked in our favor tremendously, and now I have a net worth 5 times greater than my in-laws. So now, of course, they want to dissolve the prenup. Suddenly, they came to visit us a few days ago, and we were all having dinner together. After dinner, once our child went to bed, they sat us down and told us they had been thinking about it a lot, and they now believed it was finally time to talk to their lawyers and dissolve the prenuptial agreement. My wife was shocked, and I was quite baffled for a moment, but then I decided to decline. I told them to their faces that I didn't think it was necessary since they themselves had stated the prenup was the only way they would feel secure accepting me as their son-in-law, and I didn't want them to lose that sense of security. Of course, I was being sarcastic, and I think they caught on, though I tried to sound as sincere as possible. They said several years had passed since then, and that now we had a child together, so they no longer had any reason to doubt me, but I still refused and told them I wasn't willing to keep discussing the matter. When I said that, they started to get upset and told me it had been their idea to create the prenup in the first place, so I should respect their wishes and dissolve it since they considered it unnecessary now. They even argued that since they were older and more experienced, we should take their advice to avoid any potential problems in the future. Honestly, I had no idea what they were talking about. After some back and forth, I told them I had no interest in continuing to talk about the prenup. Since my wife and I weren't planning on divorcing anytime soon, they should drop it too. But they just wouldn't let it go, and the situation escalated into an argument. All the drama we had swept under the rug for so many years began to come to light. Eventually, I mentioned how they had designed that prenup and presented it to me just to humiliate me, reminding me that I wasn't in the same social class as them. Now that I had surpassed them, they suddenly wanted to pretend none of that had ever happened. Their argument was that they only wanted to ensure their daughter's future. In case I turned out to be a gold-digging husband who would just exploit her while we were married, they wanted her to at least have a safety net in the form of that prenup. They claimed they were just looking out for their daughter. That went on for a while, and after a while, I was too tired to keep arguing with them. I decided to tell them I was done talking and wanted them to leave. I thought I was being perfectly reasonable in asking them to leave because we were making a lot of noise, and my child was asleep. I didn't want to wake him. Additionally, it was quite late, and I just wanted them to leave so I could rest and clear my head from all this. However, they took offense at that and told me that the only reason I've reached where I am today is because of the support they and their daughter gave me. This is where I disagree. They never supported me. They only supported their daughter. Yes, I mentioned before that they occasionally sent money while I was working on my business, and I'm grateful for that. But that money wasn't for me. It was for their daughter. We could have easily managed without their help because I had some savings of my own. The only times they sent money were when my wife asked for it, and that money was specifically for her own expenses. Sometimes she would run short after taking care of household expenses. I offered to use my savings several times, but she told me not to because her parents had money, and she knew they wouldn't mind sending it to her. So technically they did support us, but only for their daughter's sake. They never trusted me. As for emotional support, let's not even talk about that. They never made me feel part of the family, and had no right to tell me I wouldn't have achieved what I have today without their support. I believe I could have easily done it without them, and they played no role in my success. So, they had no right to throw that in my face like that. When I said this, they started shouting even louder and the argument escalated. They thought I was being ungrateful for saying they had nothing to do with my success. At one point, they turned to my wife and told her she needed to make a decision now because they had tried to support our relationship as much as they could. But the situation was spiraling out of control because I refused to acknowledge their contributions. Somehow my wife managed to convince them to leave, and we haven't spoken since. She has remained in contact with her parents and has been trying to get them to apologize. Though I've told her I don't need an apology, I just want them to stay away from me. They can freely visit her and have the same relationship with our son, but the only thing I want is space. I'm not interested in repairing my relationship with them right now, especially after everything that happened the other day. The argument had been brewing for a long time, and honestly, I'm surprised we managed to avoid such an emotional confrontation for so many years. But, well, it's done and dusted, and I just want to stay away from them. However, I recently found out from my wife that, while trying to convince them to apologize for everything they said and for how they've treated me over the years, they've been trying to brainwash her into asking me for a divorce. Yesterday afternoon, she came to me with her phone and showed me several messages. She was quite upset because she'd been trying so hard to make things normal again. Our son really loves his grandparents, and she didn't want things to get weird with the family. Neither did I, to be honest. But after reading those messages, I'm no longer so sure. They refused to acknowledge that they ever treated me poorly, acting as if they had every right to do so, even if it was humiliating for me. Not only did they defend their behavior, but they also accused me of being ungrateful for their support, which, again, I don't think ever really existed. They claimed that's why my wife should start rethinking her marriage to me and consider divorcing me now before it's too late, because I clearly don't love her enough to respect her family. And since I don't want to dissolve the prenup, they also suggested that now I'm starting to distrust her because she has some money of her own. It's pure nonsense they're trying to plant in her head to get her to ask me for a divorce, but she doesn't believe it. She's just exhausted from trying to make them see reason. The only point she thinks they might have is the fact that, albeit somewhat reluctantly, they did support us financially a little during our early days when I was working on my business and she was covering all the expenses. However, I don't feel the need to acknowledge that because they clearly did it only for their daughter. It had nothing to do with me, and if my wife had allowed me, I would have used my savings to contribute during that time, and we wouldn't have had to rely on them for anything. Besides, they always made sure I never felt accepted into the family and treated me as if I was only with my wife for the money. But I'm here to ask, Am I the bad guy for refusing to thank my in-laws for supporting my wife and me when I was starting my business? Edit. I don't actually have any issue with dissolving the prenup. My only issue is the timing of their request because my wife and I recently made some major purchases for both of us, but they're under my name. It's not a big deal for her, and it's not for me either, because we love each other and we'll make it work no matter how much we argue. In fact, we're not even fighting right now. Divorce is definitely not on the table for us, but I guess my in-laws have been reflecting on things, which is why they made this decision at this moment. As for how much they financially supported us at the start, I haven't paid them back, but if they ask, I have no issue repaying all the money. The only reason I haven't offered is that I didn't think I owed them anything. As soon as my business started generating income, my wife didn't have to spend a single dollar out of her own pocket. I've been taking care of her. At this point, I think it's fair to say we're even. Any money they contributed was given to their daughter, and I had no part in that. My wife hasn't had to spend much of her personal money since my business started making money, so I believe that debt has been repaid in that way. But even after all that, if my in-laws believe I should repay the money, I'm more than happy to do so if it means they'll leave me alone. Update 1. It's been a week since the fight with my in-laws, and from what I've read so far, opinions about my situation seem divided. But I've already made a decision. I'm going to return all the money they ever contributed. I have a rough amount in mind, and I don't want to owe them anything. I also don't want to constantly feel indebted to them or feel like I have to worship the ground they walk on because of it. I want to be able to stand up for myself without having it thrown in my face every time. I talked to my wife about this, and she thinks it's a good idea. Her parents haven't stopped trying to brainwash her into divorcing me because they believe I've disrespected them multiple times, even though they've never acknowledged how much they've disrespected me and my family on numerous occasions. If they can't handle being treated the same way they've treated us for years, then I believe they had no right to behave like that in the first place. Honestly, I think I was pretty polite at first, before the argument escalated and they started making personal attacks. With them, however, it has always been direct hostility toward me and my family. They didn't even bother pretending to like us. So I think my behavior was reasonable after spending so many years holding back my feelings and trying to be respectful. By returning the money, I won't owe them anything. They've never supported me emotionally, nor have they pretended to accept me. Both my wife and I are truly exhausted from dealing with this situation, and we're hoping that writing them a check will solve all our problems. Normally, I don't think throwing money at a relationship problem resolves anything, but with them, I think it's the only way. They're literally that materialistic and selfish. I can't imagine other parents trying to ruin their own daughter's marriage, especially when there's a child involved, just because their ego is more important than everything else. It says a lot about how much they really care about her and how much they pretend to care about her well-being. The truth is, the only thing they care about is their image, their ego, and themselves. I'll keep you updated once we take this next step, but I'm hoping this finally brings some peace to our lives. Update 2. Earlier today, my wife spoke to her parents and told them I was willing to write them a check and end this whole situation because it's becoming exhausting for both of us. Since this whole thing started over money, we thought maybe paying them back for everything they've done for us in the past would fix things. But of course, it didn't fix anything. In fact, they were offended by the mere suggestion that they could be bought. They told my wife this wasn't about the money anymore, which is strange, because based on how they acted during our fight, it seemed like it was about the money. However, now it's suddenly about the respect I've supposedly never shown them. This feels insane to me because I could make the same claim about them. My wife and I genuinely don't know what they're talking about. I've always been polite and civil with them, and they're the ones who've always had a bad attitude toward me. I've literally never disrespected them, but they believe this one incident, where I refuse to acknowledge their so-called support, is somehow equivalent to years of disrespecting me, my family, and taking advantage of my love for their daughter. It's not the same at all, and at this point even my wife agrees. Fortunately, they're not talking to me at the moment. They're only communicating with her, and my wife is completely on my side. However, they're still trying to brainwash her into divorcing me. Now they've even started telling her she needs to protect our child and take steps toward custody. It's absurd. I truly can't imagine having a normal relationship with them after all this. It's pathetic that it's not enough for them to try to ruin our marriage. Now they want my wife to pursue custody of our child, all because of their own egos. Honestly, I think this behavior is reason enough not to respect them at all. This is the kind of treatment I've received since I met my wife, and now, seeing them try to destroy our family like this just reaffirms everything I've felt. I'm grateful my wife is on my side, but at this point, I don't see a way forward with them. Update 3. It's been a little over 2 weeks since the fight with my in-laws, and in the past few days my wife has stopped responding to them. She believes it's a lost cause. She did everything she could to explain to her parents why they were wrong, but they kept insisting she should ask for a divorce. She got tired of trying to fix the situation on her own. They made it clear they weren't interested in reconciling, so she stopped responding to them. As a result, they decided to show up at our house today. I was the one who opened the door, and they completely ignored me, walking right in and calling for my wife. At this point, I'm not even surprised by their behavior anymore. After accusing me of disrespecting them, they act like hypocrites. I didn't say anything, I just waited for my wife to come out. When she did, she immediately told them she wasn't interested in talking to them unless they were willing to acknowledge our perspective. They responded by saying they were there to confront her about her behavior, as she was apparently becoming as disrespectful as me. They even said that since I owed them, she owed them too and shouldn't forget it. That's when my wife lost her patience and started yelling at them, and rightfully so. She told them she never asked them to do anything for her, and that they had no right to hold it over her head, as everything they did was of their own will. If they hadn't wanted to, they could have refused to help, and we would have made it work without their assistance. Other parents help their children out of love, not to throw it in their faces like my in-laws have done. As for gratitude, we've done our best to be thankful and show them respect, despite their ridiculous behavior toward me and my family. We stayed silent for years to avoid drama and keep the peace, but now it's impossible not to confront them. They need to realize that respect isn't something you can demand, it's something you earn, and they've done nothing to deserve it. My wife argued with them for quite a while, and I stayed silent, not wanting to interact with them at all. After some time, she started getting upset, so I stepped in to calm her down. That's when my in-laws started blaming me for everything, saying it all began because I refused to dissolve the prenup. I had to correct them. I told them this didn't start because of the prenup, but because they decided to treat me poorly simply because I didn't come from the circle of wealthy kids they'd hoped their daughter would marry. That's what's bothered them all these years, and it's why they've always treated me badly. I explained that I'd put up with it for so long because I didn't want to make a big deal out of it, but they couldn't get away with it forever, and they needed to realize that. That's why I refused to dissolve the prenup, because I won't be their puppet and do what they say. Things got even more tense after that, but I didn't let it get to me. They kept yelling, saying horrible things, and cursing at me to provoke a reaction, but I stayed calm. That only annoyed them more. When they realized they couldn't rile me up, they told my wife she had to choose between them and me. That's when my wife declared she would choose her family, her husband and son. She told her parents to leave our house and that they'd soon receive the check, after which we'd be done with them. Her parents were in shock. They clearly didn't expect that reaction from her. They probably assumed they'd have another chance because that's what's always happened in the past. But honestly, both my wife and I have had enough. When they tried to continue arguing, my wife threatened to call the police if they didn't leave immediately. They finally left, and since then, we've blocked them everywhere. We're officially cutting them out of our lives. It's going to be hard to explain to our son why he won't see his grandparents anymore, but thankfully, he has another set of loving grandparents. Maybe reconciliation will be possible in the future, but for now, this is the best path forward. We tried our best to make things work with them, but it's clear they only want everything on their terms, which is no longer an option. Honestly, I feel relieved that both my wife and I stood up for our rights. It feels like a weight has been lifted off our shoulders, and we're happy to have faced the situation head-on. Update 4. After 2 months of no contact with my in-laws, my wife and I were trying to move on with our lives. However, things took a completely unexpected and much more serious turn a couple of weeks ago. My in-laws filed a false report against me, accusing me of child abuse against my son. I can't describe the horror and disbelief I felt when Child Protective Services arrived at our door. As with any such report, it's taken very seriously, so Child Services decided to temporarily take our child while they investigated the situation. Those were the darkest days of my life. Watching them take my son away, powerless to stop it, completely broke me. My son was crying, begging not to leave, screaming that he wanted to stay with us. I can't even begin to describe how I felt at that moment. Fortunately, the social workers conducted a thorough and fair investigation. They discovered that the accusations were untrue and there was no abuse in our home. In fact, the bruises my in-laws mentioned in their report were from a fall our son had while playing, something completely normal for a child his age. Doctors confirmed there were no signs of abuse or mistreatment. A few days ago, we finally got our son back. I can't describe the relief we felt having him home again, but at the same time, we are deeply angry. For our son, it was also very traumatic. When he returned, he didn't want to let us go and tearfully told us how he had told the social workers he wanted to come back to us. I can't believe my in-laws were capable of something so low, using their own grandson in their absurd vendetta against me. And, as if that wasn't enough, this whole scandal has also affected my business. Although the report was false and it's clear I did nothing, the damage is done. News like this spreads quickly, and my company's reputation has suffered. I've lost some major contracts, and several clients are questioning whether they want to continue doing business with me. Even though the truth has come to light, those kinds of stains are hard to erase quickly. It's frustrating because I've worked so hard to get to where I am, and everything is being jeopardized by my in-laws' malicious actions. At this point, we're not willing to let this slide. We are furious. Filing such a serious false report and taking a child from their parents is not something we're going to overlook. I've been speaking with my lawyer, and it turns out one of his friends specializes in litigation related to defamation and false allegations. We believe we have a solid case to sue my in-laws for the damages they've caused us, both personally and professionally. Even though I'm struggling to process everything that's happened, I'm determined to seek justice. This didn't just affect my wife and me, it also impacted my son, who was used as a tool in this absurd revenge scheme. I'm furious about what they did to him. No child should have to go through something like this. My wife fully agrees with taking legal action. After everything we've been through with her parents, this was the final straw. She's completely angry and disappointed in them. They took her child, her peace, and tried to destroy her marriage repeatedly. While it's been a difficult process, she has stood firmly by my side, and now more than ever, we are united in the decision to see this through to the end. Update 5. After 9 long months battling in court, I finally have good news to share. It's been a complicated road, full of stress and frustration, but it has paid off. First, I want to talk about my business. Despite the chaos of recent months, my business has managed to recover quite well. It's not at 100% of where it should be, and I know the impact of what my in-laws did played a significant role in slowing its growth. Even so, the simple fact that it has grown amidst all this turmoil is a positive sign that we are leaving this chaos behind. I feel optimistic that, with time and consistent effort, my business will get to where it should be. The support of my most loyal clients has been fundamental, and despite losing some major contracts, I'm grateful that many others decided to stick with me and trust that everything would be cleared up. It's been a huge relief to see things slowly stabilizing. Even though the damage caused won't disappear overnight, I feel like we're on the right track. Now, the big news. We won the lawsuit against my in-laws. Honestly, I can't describe how satisfied I feel with the outcome. After everything they did, justice was on our side. The judge ruled in our favor, and now my in-laws will have to pay high 6-figure damages, so close to 7 figures that I know it will hurt them deeply. It won't be easy for them. From what I know, they will probably have to sell their summer house to cover the payment, as it's not like they have all that money readily available in their bank accounts. The irony of all this is that if they had accepted the check we offered months ago, things would have been much better for them. But their pride and thirst for control pushed things too far, and now, instead of receiving the money they thought I owed them, they're the ones who have to pay me. What could have been a peaceful and reasonable closure initially ended up being a very costly lesson for them. Thanks to this result, we'll not only recover what we lost in my business during these months, but also teach my in-laws a lesson not to mess with us. My son has also begun to recover. After everything that happened, we started taking him to therapy to help him process what occurred. The good thing about all this, as I like to find the positive in everything, is that at least my in-laws will think twice before trying anything against us again.